moving on with our sessions, we will now take a look at firewall policy modes, where I will want to discuss profile-based and policy-based NGFW mode. Okay, so FortiGate supports two different next-generation firewall modes, which is kind of like a misleading name because what they generally control is going to be the structure and the look of the firewall policy. The default NGFW mode is known as profile-based, which means that when it comes to more advanced configuration of the policy rules, specifically so-called security profiles, which are used to control the inspection capabilities of the firewall, you will have to define these elements separately from the policy, and if you want to use them, you will then have to attach them to a given security policy rule. This is the default profile-based approach. It works really well, but a small problem with that is that most of the other firewall vendors, they use a different approach where they allow you to configure the inspection capabilities directly from the policy rule itself. And this is why FortiGate supports the other NGFW mode known as policy-based, in which case FortiOS gives you kind of like changes the look and feel of the structure of firewall policy. It even calls it a security policy to kind of like make this difference even more significant. Where the idea is that in general, you will be able, once the policy-based mode is configured, you will be able to configure the inspection capabilities directly from the policy rule. This is number one change. And the second change is that configuration of other auxiliary features or just technologies like network address localization, like authentication policy, SSL inspection policy is going to be separated from the policy rule definition. Because this is what most of the other firewall vendors like Palo Alto Networks, maybe even Cisco, do. They give you an option to create policies for like a NAT, like authentication, separately from the definition of the security policy rules. Plus, the inspection capabilities are generally configured from within security policy rules themselves. So this is why this policy-based mode was created. It is generally meant to make the whole transition of your policy from a non-Fortinet vendor to FortiGate devices. Okay, but going back to the original, which is the default, the profile-based mode. So this is what is enabled by default. And in this case, all security profile definitions and settings for those profiles are separated from the configuration of firewall policy rules. Plus, in case of network address localization, NAT-related settings and NAT config is generally configured on a per policy rule. And a special NAT feature called central NAT is not required. It is by default disabled. There is also an additional difference which is related to traffic inspection. A traffic inspection controls the behavior associated related to the inspection of data packets that go across the firewall. We have what is known as the flow-based traffic inspection and proxy-based traffic inspection. Now, the difference from a very high level is that with the flow inspection, the system kind of like takes a snapshot of the packet and does the inspection on the fly, versus with proxy mode, it buffers the traffic and it does the inspection when everything is buffered. We will talk about this stuff in a different video series when we get to the discussion on security profiles. But in case of profile-based mode, you can easily select one or another traffic inspection mode, and you can do it per rule basis. You guys don't forget to subscribe if you like our content. Thanks. Versus with policy-based mode, this is technically not documented, but as far as I know, it works with the flow-based traffic inspection, which is generally faster and recommended by Fortinet. Okay, now in terms of other characteristics, if we take a look at security profiles, there are two, I would say, main profiles that most people use: applications and URL categories are now part of the policy. Okay, so it means that you can easily build application-based roles with that approach, because in addition to selecting services like what you do in the profile-based mode, you can easily configure applications directly within the role. Plus, you can also select URL categories, like if you want to do web filtering. So this is something that is also possible to do in the profile-based mode, but in the profile-based mode, you would first have to create a profile and attach it to the role. Okay, also the SSL inspection settings and authentication settings are defined separately. When I say separately, I'm thinking outside the firewall policy role. This is the second change. Plus, when it comes to network address translation, the central NAT is enforced, which means that all your network address translation configuration is done at one place in the, let's call it NAT policy. So you no longer configure NAT directly within a role. You've got one place when you add roles which will eventually affect all communication that goes through the firewall. Okay, policy-based mode also supports what is known as the learn mode, where learn mode is basically the ability of configuring a policy role to monitor the traffic without enforcing a policy, so we can just log and see what matches the policy rule. Okay, the profile-based mode, as I said, is by default enabled, but if you want to switch to the policy-based mode and possibly also go back to the profile-based mode, you would do this under system settings. I'm talking about this place NGFW mode. You see, profile-based is by default enabled. We also have the ability to enable central NAT, source NAT. Versus when I switch to policy-based, the first difference you can tell is that the central NAT option is no longer available, because remember that policy-based NGFW mode enforces central NAT. But just to point out the differences one by one, maybe first and foremost, let's take a look at the structure of policy and objects. Okay, so just to make it clear, we've got firewall policy as our first entry, followed by, maybe let's do it like this. Let's just say that we've got the firewall policy over here, and then we've got DOS policy, addresses, Internet Service Database, services, and some other stuff. So this is how policy and objects menu looks when you are with the default profile-based mode. Now, if we now change the mode to policy-based and apply, we go back to policy objects. We see that the difference is that our firewall policy is now called a security policy. The DOS policy is over here. We have an entry for central SNAT and SSL inspection and authentication. And then we've got DOS policy, addresses, Internet Services Database, and the remaining stuff. So basically, we see that this is a change. The firewall policy is now called security policy. Then we see we've got an additional menu called central SNAT and SSL inspection and authentication. This is change number one. It changes the structure of the menu when you change the mode. When we now go back to the profile mode, The remaining portion is where we will focus on the firewall policy role options. So when I say creating a role, we look at the different options here. The first thing is that we don't see an entry for what is known as the learn mode. Okay, we will see it when we change to policy-based. Now, when we go down, we have an option for that, and we have the option for inspection mode. Okay, I'm gonna say that we have no learn mode. Then second, we've got an option for the inspection mode. And another one is NAT. Now, if we now take a look at security profiles, we've got antivirus, web, filter, a DNS, a filter, we've got application control, IPS, file, filter, and the last one is there is also an entry for SSL inspection. This is how the security profiles section looks like. And then we've got the log options. So let's now see what is going to be the change when we go to system settings and change the next generation firewall mode to policy-based. Okay, so it tells me that it enables central NAT and that the default server is only available for registered devices with valid FortiGate support contracts. This is fine. I don't have a valid contract, so this is why we see this second message. Okay, we go back to the this time security policy. We say create new. First difference is that we've got the policy mode, which is where we can say that this is just to learn. So learn, once again, is when you allow the traffic and log it for monitoring purposes, like if you want to understand the different traffic patterns with, let's say, FortiAnalyzer. Okay, then we go down to the firewall and network options, and notice that, okay, so learn mode is what we now see, but we don't have the inspection mode, and we don't see an entry for NAT. And if we look at the security profiles here, we've got antivirus, we've got web filter, we've got DNS filter, we don't have application control, we've got IPS file filter, and we don't have SSL inspection. And then the last thing is that we've got the logging options. Okay, so the reason why we don't have the application control and SSL stuff is that first and foremost for SSL, you've got a separate kind of like policy where you can define the SSL inspection and authentication settings. You even have a single default rule for that. NAT is configured over here. And if we take a look at the policy definition, one of the elements we can configure, actually two elements, is the application and it's the URL category. So I can do this stuff directly from the policy, which I wasn't able to do in the profile-based mode. Also notice how limited are going to be the web filtering options. When we go to security profiles and say create a new web filter profile, I can pretty much give it the name and enable a safe search on Google, Yahoo, Bing, and Yandex, and configure some static URL filtering options. Just enable disable option. Versus if we go back to the profile mode, first and foremost, let's go back to the security policy, firewall policy, create and role. We don't have an entry for the application or web category. But if we take a look at security profile and web filter, We've got also an entry for application control, which is where we can define our application. But if we now take a look at the web filter, we've got much more options than in the policy-based mode, because this is where we can basically select, define our categories. Okay, so just to recap, the policy-based mode is what you could potentially enable when you do the migration from a non-Fortinet vendor to FortiGate. But most people, from my experience and also experience of other people, I can tell you that in many cases you will see some minor bugs associated with the policy mode. So most folks, when they get used to FortiGate, what they do is they work with the profile-based next generation firewall mode.